Evening. So I guess it's time to do some more Warhammer 40,000 lore. And unlike most other lore videos, the Empress Children is actually a legion that I know quite a lot about. So a bit of a background with me and them first is that when Fulgrim first came out, as in the book, I got it perhaps a year later, the Graham McNeil book Fulgrim, the Horus Heresy book. And I was absolutely enraptured by the character of Fulgrim. I loved everything about him. I thought as a tragic, flawed character that I was getting more and more attached to, that kind of a character when I was getting older. He just struck a chord with me. He really did strike a chord with me. And the reason why I talk about Games Workshop's copyright infringement chasing antics is because the Empress Children are probably the main reason why I got into Berserk, the manga, period. Because Griffith was so much like Fulgrim. He was a bit more annoying, to be honest with you, because at least Fulgrim does some badass things and, you know, doesn't really... Fulgrim gets hurt, is what I'm saying. He gets punched in the face a lot, whereas I always figured that in Berserk you're not even allowed to touch Griffith. He's just this perfect being, and it's really annoying. But in terms of the Empress Children themselves, I actually think that as a legion, they are extremely interesting. Extremely interesting. So, first of all, let's start talking about the Empress Children as a legion. So, they are very, very strange in terms of their actual origins, because in the early years of the Empress Children, they were actually a force that were taken from the nobility of Terra. So these are people who are, whenever Terra is taken over by a bit of Terra is taken over by the Emperor's armies, he takes the cream of the crop, as you will, for the Emperor's Children, the force that would become the Emperor's Children. They're not called this at this moment in time. Now this leads to some confusion with some people, in that the Word Bearers have a similar thing going for them later on in the Crusade, where they're called the Imperial Heralds, where they go and they bring the Emperor's word to dissident empires and kingdoms and things like that. And whenever somebody needed to do that, it would be a word bearer from the Word Bearers Legion, Lorgar's Legion, who would go and make overtures to people and the public, and be orators to the public and tell them about the imperial truth and all that. Well, the Empress Children did something very, very similar, but they were more backdeal representatives of the backdoor representatives of the Emperor. Which is very ironic, because they will eventually become the backdoor representatives of Slaanesh, but we'll get to that when we get to it. So the Empress Children, earlier on in the Crusade, are the people who meet with the kings and emperors of other states. If the Emperor wants to impress the nobility, and impress the ruling powers of states that he wants to take into the Imperial fold, he will send an Empress Children Marine. They're not called the Empress Children at this point. They're called the Third Legion. He will send a warrior of the Third Legion to go and talk to them, because these are beautiful, tall, you know, scions of perfection. These people, you know, they're from the cream of the crop of Terra. So that is the early foundation of the Empress Children as a legion, as the Third Legion. Going over to Fulgrim, because the Empress Children's story is really Fulgrim's story, and I don't think there are many other Primarks, if any, that actually have more of an impact on their legion than Fulgrim does. Fulgrim is the personification of his legion, and unlike others like Conrad Kurz and Mortarion, and even to a lesser extent people like Lionel Johnson, they're not separated he's not separated from his warriors at all. Fulgrim is literally an Empress Children. He is the quintessential Marine of his legion, which is how the Primarchs are meant to be designed. So Fulgrim grew up in a world called Chemos, and Chemos was a huge mining world full of refractories and smog-filled skies and pollution and things like that. And I was surprised when I saw this. I was surprised when I saw that this was Fulgrim's beginning, because I always figured that he would be on a feudal world full of like warring knights or, you know, duelists and things like that. But no, he actually comes to land, as we saw from the Lionel Johnson video. Fulgrim is in another capsule, and he crash lands after being ejected by the powers of chaos from the Emperor's laboratories. He crash lands on Chemos, and is taken in by the people there. And obviously his genius as a Primarch, as we will see throughout these stories about the Primarchs and about the original legions, he starts to outstrip nearly everybody around him in terms of mental capacity and obviously physical capacity. He ends up creating inventions that not only make mining a lot easier on the world, but they make it largely autonomous. And so for centuries after this, Fulgrim doesn't unite his world through wars and conquests. He unites his world through peace, through luxury, through giving them a better life than what they had before, essentially. Because leisure time is now something that is very common on Chemos. And so we see a flowering of culture, of art, of poetry, of all the things that you do in your leisure time that give you pleasure. Now, would this have, you know, climbed into a debased world of depravity eventually? Maybe, without the Emperor's coming. But the Emperor did arrive. The Emperor did arrive, and he took Fulgrim in. Fulgrim, like many other Primarchs, knew exactly who he was speaking to when he was looking at the Emperor, went to be by his side. And he was given command of the 3rd Legion. Now, the 3rd Legion, and this is a strange thing, it's very much like the Thousand Sons. The 3rd Legion actually suffered a defect in their gene seed, or a calamity that happened to their gene seed, which we don't really go into in the lore. I don't really want to explore it, because we're not given any definitive answers as to what the hell happened. But what we do know is that the Legion numbered only around 200 Marines when Fulgrim was given command of it. A shameful thing for him, because he always factored on perfection. He always wanted the perfect warriors to serve him. And he always wanted his legion to be the very best legion that there was in all forms of combat. Now, unfortunately, he only had 200 Marines, and just for reference, legions at this time had over, well, in excess of 100,000 Marines each, which is a astronomical amount of Marines. Fulgrim is given to Horus. He goes and serves with Horus, and who inducts him into the Imperial fold and becomes one of his greatest friends. When he is back on Terra, doing a bit more training, his legion is gaining numbers at this point. You know, the gene seed has been rectified. They're starting to pull back numbers. He goes back to Terra and he meets Ferrus Manus. Ferrus Manus being the Primarch, his brother, that is the Primarch of the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands. Now these two, I've always thought that their relationship, their friendship was very, very, very strange, but also really fitting. In that Ferrus Manus was a perfectionist. He was a perfectionist at the forge. And Fulgrim, they essentially challenge each other to make weapons for the other, right? I'll make you a weapon, you make me a weapon, and we'll see who wins. And they toil for a long time in the foundries of Terra until they come up with their weapons. And Fulgrim says, when he's given the weapon Fireblade by Ferrus Manus, says, Ferrus, you are the winner. You have won this. This far outstrips my weapon. It's just amazing. It accentuates me. It defines me in every single way. It's like you've seen into my soul, and you know, and you knew what to make. And he gives Ferrus Manus Forgebreaker, which is this huge hammer. And Ferrus Manus says exactly the same thing in return. Says, no, you've clearly won. You've made something that is literally me in this form. They take their weapons and they leave as great friends, and these two become brothers as they go on. In more than one sense of the word, they become the best of friends. So, going into later on in the Crusade, so Fulgrim's combat record is pretty good. It's not the best, and they're always striving to be the best. His war fleet becomes this portable celebration of art and culture, but also art on the battlefield. This is a conquering army, let's not forget, and the heart of this fleet is a bunch of Space Marines. So, everything comes to a head for Fulgrim at the Temple of the Lair. Now, this is where Fulgrim's story starts to become a little bit chaosy. And I love the Fulgrim book, and I wouldn't have changed it. And when I change the Fulgrim lore later on, you'll know what I mean. So, Fulgrim takes a sword from this world that he conquers, called the Lair, and it's called the Lair Blade, Laer, the Lair Blade. Little does he know that this thing possesses a greater demon of Slaanesh, which begins to exert its control over Fulgrim over the many months and perhaps even years between him taking the blade and his disregarding of Fireblade. How dare he? One thing that you guys will know when you see the Iron Talons is that the actual relic blade of the Iron Talons is a shortened down version of Fireblade. They found the fragments of Fireblade. This is the blade of Fulgrim that Ferrus Manus made. They take it to the Iron Hands after serving with them, and the Iron Hands reforge it into a smaller version. It's still called Fireblade, but it's no longer like Primark size. It's now able to easily be wielded in two hands by a Marine, and that's the relic blade of the Iron Talons. But anyway, getting away from myself. So, Fulgrim at this time, he's using the Lair Blade, and it's starting to corrupt him. It's starting to turn him around. It's starting to exert influence over his actions, and they become more and more... The jealousy that he feels towards other people becomes more and more apparent. The fact that he wants to be the best becomes more and more apparent. The fact that he will do anything to achieve perfection becomes more and more apparent. He starts chasing highs, essentially. Yeah? He starts chasing highs. And this leads on to his Legion. They start to chase highs as well. And it culminates... Again, I'm shortening this. Please go and read Fulgrim if you haven't already. It culminates in what I can only describe as a blood orgy that takes place on the flagship of Fulgrim, where Slaaneshi demons are summoned during a musical performance by Bekwa Kienska. Don't ask me how I remember that name, I just do. So, at this point, the Legion is completely committed to the hedonistic tendencies and the sadistic tendencies, to the point that when the eventual betrayal does come at East Van 3, the Drop Site Massacre, one of the things that I really didn't like about the Horus Heresy, about the role of Fulgrim in the Horus Heresy, is that his Legion kind of becomes a joke. It's only Span 5, sorry. His Legion kind of becomes a joke, in that, you know, during obviously the Drop Site Massacre is where Horus is going to be reprimanded by 7 loyal legions against 3 traitor ones, and 4 of the traitor legions, I think, turn against the other loyalist legions and decimate them almost entirely. So at this point, the Empress Children Legion has devolved into a legion of pleasure seekers who are dancing around the battlefield, gleefully cutting parts of their fallen allies and enemies alike, and are plastering them onto their armor and singing and dancing and having a jolly good time. Whilst this was horrific to me when I read this in the actual book, because Fulgrim is the only book that has a real blow-by-blow account of East Van 5. The others have like 1 or 2 chapters. This has a blow-by-blow account of the entire thing from start to finish towards the end of the book. And it was horrifying to me to see these legionaries, these gods among men, you know, devolving into this thing, into this horrid nightmare fuel of people. So, 1 second. So, the Legion from this moment on is essentially a caricature of what it once was. And even in the Siege of Terra, it is an absolute shit show. The Emperor's Children are generally doing their own thing. After one attack on the Imperial walls, they just get bored and leave and start pillaging and murdering and doing worse things than that to the Imperial populace of Terra. Yeah, and again, essentially, they break off through no real for no real war or malice, they break off into splintering warbands until the Legion Wars that take place within the Eye of Terror, where they are broken apart because they've cloned Horus, the dead Horus. They've cloned him, and I'll get back to that much later. So I want to go into now the actual look of the Legion itself. We've gone through its history. I did say this would be a shorter video than the Dark Angels one, and it will. But now we've covered their history up until this point. I just want to talk about their aesthetics. So their aesthetics are very visually pleasing. These are pieces of armor that are meant to be ornamental pieces as well as pieces of armor. And the Empress Children had a reputation with the other legions for being quite frivolous, for being quite, decorative and not very good warriors. Of course, that wasn't the case. Almost every time we see an Emperor's Children warrior fight somebody else in the Horus Heresy, they end up winning. Don't ask me why. I think it's to offset the fact that, basically the other legions think they're a bunch of girls. The very famous Jagatai Khan quote of, Fulgrim says, "Oh, I hear you do strange things to your bikes." Jagatai Khan. Jagatai Khan says, "I hear you do strange things to your warriors." Right? Straight burn. Probably the greatest burn that there's been in a Warhammer Games Workshop style novel ever. But that is a very telling thing of what the other legions thought of the Emperor's Children. But an unfair assumption as far as I'm concerned, because the Emperor's Children were duelists supreme. These are people who treat the battlefield like it's a canvas on which they're painting a rather large and beautiful tapestry with which to honour the Emperor. And the way that Fulgrim was pulled around to being a traitor, to being on Horus's side, was one, he was one of Horus's best friends. But the second part was, he just couldn't help himself. The demon had already been exerting an influence on his mind, true. But I honestly think, and I seriously think this, even if Fulgrim was not corrupted by the Layer Blade, I still think he would have turned traitor. But I think Fulgrim would have been the only traitor to turn back again. Okay? Now, I'll get into this when I go to rewrite the story of Fulgrim later on. But I think Fulgrim's main flaw was that he just couldn't help himself. He always had to push himself against the best. And if Horus is saying, you can go and fight the best, why don't we go and fight the Emperor's people? It's too tempting. Like, I can't not do that. Like, that was his main flaw. And Horus twisted knife expertly in flattering him and bringing him round to his side, saying, look, I can't do this without you. You're the main one that I need. He knows what Fulgrim wants to hear. Fulgrim wants to hear that he's loved, that he's the best, that he's the one who everyone wants to follow. That's what he wants. And that's what he gets from Horus. And his legion devolves into the worship of Slaanesh, and it's a very insidious... The thing that I like about it is it's a very, as I just said, insidious corruption. It's not like other legions, like the Sons of Horus and people like that, where they sort of, just take on chaos for more power. They're not doing it for that. It's more insidious than that. It's underneath the surface. It attacks. This is chaos, attacking the very core of what being an Emperor's Children Marine is. And that's the pursuit of perfection, of art, of culture, of pleasure, of happiness. And that's why the Emperor's Children are so tragic, is because they are one of the only armies in the Emperor's employ who chase happiness. They want to be happy. They want to create an empire that people want to live in. Rather than you got other legions like the Iron Warriors, like the Space Wolves, like the Thousand Suns. You've got all these really combative legions who are there to eradicate what they find and replace it with the Imperial truth. Well, whilst the Empress Children want to bring people into the Imperial fold, they want to leave good stuff behind, And I think the Empress Children are one of the, if not the only legion, where what they leave behind is what the Emperor envisaged, right? And that's the true tragedy of the Emperor's Children. He called them the Emperor's Children because Fulgrim gave a speech on Terra to the 200 Marines that he had left when he first took command of them, that was so rousing that actually touched the Emperor, and he said, you know, you will be called the Empress Children, and you're the only legion allowed to bear my Aquila, my personal sigil. You're the only legion allowed to do that. You know, what I think was going on there is that the Emperor was also able to see right through to the heart of Fulgrim and knew what he wanted to hear, and he told him what he wanted to hear, right? Because he's a master manipulator, just like Horus was. Even though he's better than Horus, right, at manipulating. In fact, you know, if the Emperor had gotten 5 minutes alone with Fulgrim at the start of the Horus Heresy, Fulgrim wouldn't have turned traitor. Fulgrim would have gone with whoever made him the first greatest offer and made him feel good. That's who Fulgrim was going to follow in the Horus Heresy. Demon or no demon, right? That's who Fulgrim was going to follow in the Horus Heresy. The first person, Emperor or Horus, to come across him and say, "You're great, we love you, please come with us," he would have gone with them. That's how much of an egotist this man was. Alright? So, in current lore, the Empress Children are currently absolutely shattered. They're broken apart. They are now roving warbands of madmen who exist only really for hedonistic pleasure. They very rarely organise as a stable legion, and even then it only tends to happen under Fulgrim, simply because they're attracted to his aura rather than he commands them in perpetuity. Fulgrim at this point probably finds commanding armies pretty boring, to be honest with you. So, that is the lore of the Empress Children so far in Warhammer 40,000. I don't have to go into that much detail because, in terms of the Empress Children, it's very strange. You can cover their lore in 4 or 5 aspects, and you can understand them. Unlike the Dark Angels, where you have to go into so much detail to explain them because they're so secretive and so, you know, reclusive. God help me when I get to the 20th Legion, just going to say that now. But with the Emperor's Children, it's quite obvious what they are, and it's quite obvious what they want, and it's quite obvious how Chaos was able to bore its way into their heart and their souls to corrupt them so totally. So, and that's why I like them so much, because they are, as a literary device, they are mwah, chef kiss. They're really, really good, right? So, let's move on. Appropriation of content. So this is something that Games Workshop are very, very guilty of. As you can see from Fulgrim there on the right-hand side, next to Horus. This guy is essentially Griffith. He is Griffith in almost every single sense of the word. People say that Conrad Kurz is Batman, but he's in Warhammer 40,000. Well, if you think that's bad, go and read Berserk and tell me that this is not Griffith in Warhammer 40,000. He's literally, and they've changed nothing about him. They literally just picked him up and put him in Warhammer 40,000. There you go, done. You know, Griffith is a character who wants his own kingdom. He wants that kingdom to be at peace. He wants this perfect place for him to rule over for all time. He wants to be known and loved as this saviour person. But that pure motivation is twisted and corrupted by evil beings, who then turn him into this perverted, evil version of what he once was. To the fact that, you know, the difference between Fulgrim and him is that Griffith almost has godlike powers at this point, so he's able to make people see him for not what he really is, and so people start to love him as this conquering hero, when in reality, we know he's the worst kind of monster. All Fulgrim is that exact character with that veneer taken away, so you can see the inside. That's it, right? That's literally it. Even the armor piece, as you can see there from the eagle, eagle wing on the left pauldron, that is literally ripped straight from Berserk. The hair, the facial structure, the way that he acts, the way that he looks, the way that his armor is dressed. The only thing they did was they took Griffith, they took that veneer away and they painted him purple. Literally, that's it. And so, this is why I get very upset when Games Workshop start going after other content creators, because as far as I'm concerned, it's the most hypocritical, ridiculous thing that I've ever seen anyone try and do, in terms of suing somebody for their own copyright, sort of a thing. Moving on. The last thing I wanted to talk about was how I would change Fulgrim. So, I would change nothing about Fulgrim the book. I think it is a perfect book from the Horus Heresy. And in all honesty, I define it as the best Horus Heresy book. If you've not read Fulgrim, go and read it. There's hardly any bolter porn in there, right? You're not going to get any huge, huge battles, even though it covers Istvan V in its entirety, right? So the bloodletting really gets turned up as the story goes on and on and on, and you do get a bit of warfare in there, but it's mainly about the downfall of this man and this legion, this once perfect legion, and it is really tragic when you see people dropping like flies towards the end. But at the end of this book, spoilers if you haven't seen it, if you haven't read it, but at the end of this book, this painting has been painted all the way through, the book, and it's been painted by this woman, quite one of the main characters, who's on the ship, and she's gradually being driven mad by Slaaneshi influences. And so instead of painting it normally, she has like writer's block. She can't paint until one day she starts to paint by killing somebody and using their blood. And by the time it's finished, she's used blood, excrement, mucus, everything to paint this warped, disgusting picture of Fulgrim. Now, the sane people on the ship can see this and see this. It's a monstrosity of a picture. But those warped by the touch of chaos see it as this beautiful, amazing, angelic piece of art that she's celebrated for. When Fulgrim kills Ferrus Manus, and this is the purposely why I haven't touched on that part of the story yet. When Fulgrim kills Ferrus Manus in Istvan V, his best friend, the Leia Blade offers him oblivion. It says, I can just take you away and kill you now if you want. And Fulgrim, in his disdain and his misery for what he's done, accepts. Which is the main reason why I say Fulgrim would have gone with whoever came to him first, right? He was far gone, but he wasn't that far gone at this point. He could still come back. The demon from the Leia Blade corrupts him and he possesses Fulgrim's form, and he seals Fulgrim's soul away inside the painting. And what does the painting look like now? It's changed. It's gone from this warped, disgusting painting to be this beautiful, angelic painting of Fulgrim as he is. As he was at his best. The only thing that's changed about him is his haunted eyes that seem to be searching around the room, screaming. Right? Now that's horrifying. That was an actual horrifying thing that you read in the Fulgrim book. But of course they couldn't just leave it well enough alone, could they? So Games Workshop, in their wisdom, went and nearly retconned all of this by having Fulgrim take his place back from the demon, and the demon is actually terrified of. So they swap places again, and the demon is actually terrified of the debauchness that is in Fulgrim's heart. He's terrified of it, and he flees back into the painting essentially. And Fulgrim takes his wrestles and takes his body back. And Fulgrim is even worse after he comes back. So this guy who was this paragon of virtue, who wanted to kill himself for what he did to Ferrus Manus, he comes back and he's even worse. The one thing that does work is that he is really damaged beyond repair at this point. His mental state is just gone. He's snapped. And he keeps trying to make Ferrus again, try and clone him, to try and pull him over to Horus's side, and he keeps failing, and having to kill him over and over and over again, which it probably does no help to his mental state whatsoever. But I found this too messy of a story. I really did. I found this too messy of a story. One thing that does come into Fulgrim's story much later on is that, for some reason, Fabius Bile, much later, Fabius Bile is an apothecary of the Empress Children, much later, he is able to create a perfect clone. In the 41st millennium, he is able to create a perfect clone of Fulgrim, just as he was. And he has all of the memories of the Horus Heresy in him as well. Right? So this is somebody who is taken from the genetic tissue of Fulgrim as he was. So obviously, Fabius Bile had a sample somewhere. He rebuilt him, and through hypnotherapy was able to imbibe him with the memories that Fulgrim has, in the actual world. Unfortunately, he is then taken. The Fulgrim is then taken prisoner by Trends in the Infinite, who is a Necron, to be stored away in his vaults. Simply because Fabius Bile can see that this guy is getting a lot of the Empress Children who were corrupted. And bear in mind, these are guys who have been on debauched loony missions for the past 10,000 years. These guys are now kneeling to him and asking his forgiveness and pulling off pieces of their armor. Some of them are committing suicide in front of him because they see this angelic, beautiful figure who they don't live up to, who they've let down. And they start, you know, committing suicide. And so that's why Fabius Bile gets rid of him, because he's like, well, what if this guy turns again? Right? I can't have this guy around. I need to get rid of him. Now, I've done something in the Iron Talons lore with this character, but we'll get to that later on. So, I would change a few things about Fulgrim's lore going forwards. One, the book of Fulgrim stays completely the same. Completely the same. Fulgrim never gets released. In fact, that painting disappears. It's whisked away and no one knows where to. Absolutely no one knows where to. Trays in the Infinite actually has it. He actually has that, you know, that painting eventually in his menagerie. And the Horus Heresy goes on just as it does in the actual story, right? But we know that there is a demon inside of Fulgrim's body, and it's not actually Fulgrim, right? So we leave that ruse in place. It goes on and on and on, and you know, Horus knows that there's a demon in there, and he knows it's not his brother. And one of the main tragic things that I hear when I read the Horus Heresy books is when Horus meets Fulgrim for the first time after he's been possessed, and he thinks, once I'm done with the Emperor, I'm going to free this man. I'm going to free my brother from this demon. And of course, we know that's never destined to happen because he loses the Siege of Terror and gets killed in the end. So, I will change nothing about the Horus Heresy. The only thing I would change is that they don't swap places again. Right? It's not retconned. We keep that beautiful ending that Graeme McNeil came up with for Fulgrim. And it carries on all the way to the 41st millennium to really make this demon Primark a hated figure amongst the fandom. Like, even the Empress Children fans want this guy dead because of what he did to Fulgrim, right? Now, here's where I would bring in the clone. For some reason, Fabius Bile cannot make this clone work. This clone, you know, he's able to create many clones of Fulgrim, but they're always deformed in some way, or they're mentally deformed. They don't have a soul, right? It's just a Marine with a brain who's kind of simple because he doesn't know what to do, right? He just, you know. And by hook or by crook, Fabius Bile gets in contact with Trays in the Infinite, who gives him an offer. I can complete your Fulgrim clone for you. All I want in return is, let's say, I don't know, 500 gene seed from some Space Marine chapter, blah, 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 right? Now, this is where the Iron Talons come in, to my headcanon. So the Iron Talons, my personal Space Marine chapter, they have their gene seed stolen, for the most part, by Fabius Bile and his warriors and the Empress Children who follow him. They go and find him, and they start fighting him and trying to get it back. And eventually they do reclaim some of their gene stock, but they also reclaim a lot of Emperor's Children untainted gene stock straight from Fulgrim, right? They get a load of that, and they escape. And in the commotion, Fabius Bile reactivates the clone, and he is given by Trays in the Infinite the painting. And Fabius Bile rips the painting open, and the soul of Fulgrim goes straight back into his own body, right? This new cloned body, and wakes up. So now, Fulgrim, we now have a reason why Fulgrim understands and remembers all of the Horus Heresy, because he was there. He's just in a new body now, and he bursts free. And the Emperor's Children there immediately start committing ritual suicide. They start killing themselves. And Trays in the Infinite takes his gene seed that he was allotted and leaves, right? Because he's only allowed a little bit of it, because Fabius Bile got his gene seed for Trazian from the Iron Talons, right? But the Iron Talons are taking back at least half of their own gene seed and are loading the Empress Children's, and they're now bugging out. Now, this story can go one of two ways now. Okay? I know in the lore that the Fulgrim clone is captured by Trazyn the Infinite. We can either go that way if we want to follow the natural lore progression, that's fine, and we'll leave it there. It's a nice tragic ending for Fulgrim. Now he's imprisoned by Trazyn the Infinite. But for me, I'd like to think that Fulgrim knows what's gone on, and he sees these other Marines there, these Imperial Marines, and just follows them. Just follows them. He follows them right back to their ship and just goes on board. And he doesn't know what to do, right? He's just sitting there, what do I do? I can't let anyone know that I'm alive because Fulgrim is a traitor and they'll kill me on sight. And so what actually happens, and I'm going to make this model too, is that there is a champion of the Iron Talons who isn't involved in the chapter's tactics or whatever he does. He just goes and does his own thing. And he wears a mask, this ornate flat mask with lots of patterns on it. And he wields he doesn't wield Fireblade, he leaves that to the Chapter Master. It's still the Chapter Master's blade. He wields a spear. And he is this beautiful, beautiful warrior in ornate, gilded power armor. And standing, you know, just shorter than the old Fulgrim, you know? So he's bigger than a normal Marine, essentially, but smaller than Guilliman. And that's Fulgrim. He's literally a part of the Iron Talons, just sitting on board of their ship, and then every now and again he'll leave and, you know, fight and do other things, and we've got this Imperial Hero now, the man behind the Iron Mask sort of a thing, you know, who's now walking around. That would be my lore. The other lore would be that, you know, he goes back to Trazyn the Infinite, you know, as a prisoner, and, you know, now we have this really cool fan option. You know, do you want your chapter to go and free Fulgrim? And go and free him, and you can have him on the tabletop. Bring out a new model for him. We've got Fulgrim back. He's now in the setting. He's not even loyalist, and he's not chaos, and he's not loyalist. Right? The only reason why he's not loyalist, though, because he's technically not loyalist, because, you know, he'll be murdered on sight as soon as he turns up. But he does fight chaos. He doesn't fight the Imperium, he fights chaos. So, that's how I would do it. That is Fulgrim. That is the Empress Children. Probably one of my favourite legions, if not my favourite. A lot of the cues for the Iron Talons are taken directly from the Empress Children. And if the Empress Children had more loyalists among them, I may even go and I may have even have made the Iron Talons the successors of the Empress Children. For all we know, in the lore right now, the Iron Talons lore that I've written, the Iron Talons are now a chimeric chapter. So they're formed actually half of Lionel Johnson's gene seed and half of Fulgrim's gene seed. It's all been mixed together. So they don't know, you know, that some of the Marines have silver hair, some of the Marines have blonde hair. And that's how it goes, right? So, that is the Emperor's Children. That is how they factor into the Iron Talons. And I wish you a very pleasant evening. Next time we'll be going over... I think we're going over the Iron Warriors, are we not? Oh, that's gonna be epic. I think Iron Warriors are number 4, aren't they? Yes, they are. Oh my god, that's awesome. Okay, so... fantastic. So next time we'll be going over Perturabo and the Iron Warriors. We're covering 2 of my favourite legions back to back. Which is spoiling me because I know after that we're going to get into some legions that I don't have a very big opinion of going forwards. But thank you very, very much for watching, and I'll speak to you next time. Have a good one.